The buffers, they say, are created from private land adjoining the cores to provide additional protection. Protection. Did you hear that? Protection. Corridors are a mix of private and public lands, usually following along rivers and wildlife migration routes. The primary characteristics of core areas are that they are no less in size than 100,000 acres and desirably over 2 million acres in the continental United States, and they allow for little, if any, human access. The primary characteristics and the 8 points of deep ecology can be summarized as follows. All life, human and non-human, has equal value. So as I dig into this Rockefeller document, you'll see why we will not be allowed to eat food derived from nature. That is why the president, the CEO, the crisis actor of this United States has created an executive order bringing in biofoods and GMO foods. We're going to talk about what that will do to the global populations in the revealing of this scenario planning with Rockefeller and Rothschild. Resource consumption above what is needed to supply vital human needs is immoral. I want you to hold on to this as you are watching what is determined to be essential jobs. You're also now seeing what is not essential in some of your stores, such as buying clothes, buying shoes. Again, resource consumption above what is needed to supply vital human needs is immoral. It is being decided for you what you need for vital survivability. And if you use more than what is decided for you, you are immoral. Human population must be reduced, and civilizations must radically change present economic, technological, and ideological structures, and that's what we are seeing right now. Believers in this plan have the obligation to implement the necessary changes. The Wildlands Project itself is supported by thousands of groups working towards its long-term implementation, and implementation may take 100 years or more. They're not short-sighted in their planning. What we are all facing right now is stealth long-range planning, 100 years or more. This global shutdown and bankruptcy didn't happen in just a few months. This was part of a strategic scenario plan. The Wildlands Project has received billions of dollars in support from wealthy and private corporate foundations, and some of which is the Turner Foundation. We're talking about the Ted Turner Foundation. Many of you may have seen the interview that I recounted when I spoke with Ted Turner a few years ago. It's up on YouTube. The name is something like Ted the Malthusian, Ted the Terrible Turner. And he talked about massive depopulation, massive restrictions of resources, because he said we would be running out of water and food. I want you to hold on to one bright spot, and actually many bright spots, but one right now is that we are not running out of water. We have primary water. So go to our other website, primarywater.org. Spread this information out far and wide. I can tell you people are listening. People are getting to primary water. Many people are doing this. Are you one of them? Because you must get to water. Any way you can, support those that are in the wildlands urban interface and help them dig and get to the water that they need. Your survival and your participation now will require joining together and starting a network of communities to survive, and you'll hear about that. I'm going to finish this because then we're going to take a break and get back into the document in full. But the Wildlands Project, again, is supported by millions and billions of dollars by wealthy and private corporations. I mentioned the Ted Turner Foundation, Patagonia, W. Alton Jones Foundation, the Lundhurst Foundation, and hundreds of others. The conclusion: the Wildlands Project exists within legal boundaries. In other words, they've made the illegal legal, just as our criminal courts are presumably courts for justice. It is the most highest ranking injustice set up that most people cannot even imagine. It's all corrupt. Everything is rigged. They say that because all of the planning for the Wildlands projects exists within legal boundaries, that should not prevent them from being concerned. At the very least, it advocates an extreme manifestation of environmental and public policy. Therefore, any claim the Wildlands Project makes towards public policy must be debated. I'm going to add right now, must be debated. This is what you're seeing with the task force. This is what you're seeing in the advisory groups. The visual illusion of a debate on television and at every level of the corporate agency structure worldwide. It is the illusion of your consent, because debate is your agreement, and it is not. And ultimately decided in the public arena, so giving again the illusion. Yet to date, it has existed. These plans have existed in anonymity, beyond the knowledge of the wider public. We're going to pause now for a moment, and then we're going to resume into part 2. So I would again ask you to share this portion far and wide and help us get this information out, because the next part is going to be what you're going to need to know moving forward. This is a follow-up to part 1. Now we're in part 2. Again, this is Deborah Taveras with StopTheCrime.net. Please subscribe to our video YouTube channel. Most importantly, send this out far and wide. This is in regards to the planned pandemic and the scenario pre-planning of what the pandemic would provide for those that plan and are in control of all technologies, weather, economics, worldwide. And part 1 is necessary for you to hear prior to this, because it sets up what you're going to hear me discuss in this Rockefeller Foundation plan entitled Scenarios for Future of Technology and International Development. And I told you in part 1 that this report is as a result of extensive efforts from many aspects of the Rockefeller Foundation. It took a year for them to assemble this particular assault upon humanity. I discussed with you the silent weapons for quiet wars and the Rockefeller and the intentions of those that are in control to seduce the global population. So again, the Rockefeller Foundation is literally a network of experts and funding mechanisms worldwide. And they've had many workshops, and many people weigh in on the document that you're about to hear. I want to tell you that the Rockefeller Foundation is located at 420 Fifth Avenue in New York. And their telephone number, in case you wish to call them, is area code 212-869-8500. You might as well have direct opportunity to contact those that wish your demise. Also, the Global Business Network is at 101 Market Street, Suite 1000 in San Francisco, in California. And their direct contact number is area code 415-932-5400. We're going to get into this. These are excerpts. This is over a 50-page document, and I have taken out excerpts. We will have this under this video, so you can click on this document and take a look at it for yourselves. We're going to go over the plan that we are all witnessing right now, because this is Rockefeller's plan to use bioweapons to impose martial law, one quarantine at a time. And they go on to say that a commercially unstable and shock-prone world in which governments weaken, criminals thrive, and dangerous innovations emerge. And this is what we're facing. This is all a plan. This is all a script that is being played out now. So they go on to tell us that also an economically depressed world in which individuals and communities develop localized, makeshift solutions to a growing set of problems. They say one important component of their strategy and their toolkit in the scenario planning is a process of creating narratives about the future based on factors likely to affect particular sets of challenges and opportunities. We at the Rockefeller Foundation believe that scenario planning has great potential for the use in philanthropy to identify unique interventions and rehearse important decisions. Rehearse important decisions. You need to understand that their illusion of philanthropic assistance is deadly. Their philanthropy monies goes to furthering their agendas. And that's what, sadly, the illusion of philanthropic contributions has been. We have been psychologically programmed with words that are not in our best interest. We think of philanthropies as a good thing, and that the corporations are giving back a little bit of what they've stolen. No, they're furthering their agendas. Important to remember. They say a scenario planning allows the Rockefeller Foundation to achieve impact more effectively. So they use the scenario planning, and they have hired many people, some of which have had 40 years plus career planning in scenario planning. Now you might think about Fauci for a minute, who's part of the daily briefing task force for the president. He's been in his position for 40 years. He is a scenario planning. He's involved in this, as are all of those engaged in the task force that you see on television right now, while we are all in lockdown, while all our stores, venues are closed, and while we are in free fall economically. This is a plan to bankrupt the global economy and transition us into a life where we are not going to be permitted to use more than what is necessary for vital human existence. And anything beyond vital human existence is considered immoral. Goes on to talk about technology and how technologies and tools will become the basic necessity for our future survival. They go on to say that the Rockefeller Foundation and GBN, which I gave you the addresses and phone numbers for, begun the scenario process by surfacing a host of driving forces that would affect the future of technology and international development. These forces were generated through both secondary research and in-depth interviews with foundation staff, foundation grantees, and internal experts worldwide. This report was put together in 2010. So for those of you that have watched Event 201, this is before Event 201. Event 201, again, is scenario planning in real time, describing what will be done on a global level to all of us. So they go on to talk about the uncertainties of a longer list of potential uncertainties, including social, technological, economic, environmental, and political trends. This is a bottom-up, top-down, lower levels of adaptive capacity emerge in the absence of characteristics and leave populations particularly vulnerable to the disruptive effects of unanticipated shocks. We have all been suffering fear and anticipation of unanticipated shocks. This is why when we were hit with fires here in Northern California, the mantra was Sonoma Strong. Be resilient. You're hearing those words. Be resilient. Be strong. Chin up. Take these assaults against you. These are weapons being used against us. And like a battered spouse in a battered relationship, we are expected to be strong and continue to withstand this type of unacknowledged attempts on all of our lives, and to extract everything that all of us have worked so hard to obtain. We're being asset stripped entirely now. Go on to talk about lockstep, a world of tighter lockdown government control and more authoritarian leadership, and limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. So that's got to sound kind of crazy. Limited innovation in the midst of Silicon Valley and all the innovation that we're seeing. As I go through this, you will see what the plan is on limiting our innovation, because they're pushing us back to a year in which our lifestyles will look like the year 1700. I'm going to go over that. It's also important to understand that the climate action plans tell us that we must maintain the reductions of temperatures between a certain level, and if we don't, there will be retaliation against those states or countries or cities that don't follow the requirements. This is a threat, and this is why we are seeing increasing weather weapon attacks and a variety of economic shocks from top down. This is an attack. So they go on to say that lockstep is a worldwide tighter top-down government, and again, the control, and more authoritarian leadership. We're seeing that occurring now. We are also hearing that there will be a hack attack, an economically unstable, shock-prone world in which governments weaken, criminals thrive, and dangerous innovations emerge. They tell us about smart scramble, an economically depressed world in which individuals and communities develop localized makeshift solutions to a growing set of problems. I'm going to interject right now what I saw when we went to Cuba. When Batista was taken out and Castro was replaced, the assets that everyone owned, the Cubans owned, were all nationalized, became property of the government, the CIA and the IMF and the Vatican. And the Cubans were left with vintage cars in the mid-50s that you see as taxis in Havana. And there has never been any support for parts for those cars. The Cubans have been literally innovative in workshops and in car repair venues, and we've looked at many of those, and have been able to repair with makeshift. That's what we're going to have to be able to do as well. They said that every scenario tells a story of how the world might progress over the next 15 to 20 years, and the time frame is now through the year 2030. This falls in line with the sustainability implementations that we've been hearing, such as UN Agenda 2021, 2030, 2035. So this is a plan through 2030, and they're envisioned from the year 2010 through and up through 2030. They go on to tell us that they invite us to immerse ourselves into each future world and consider 4 different visions for the evolution of technology and international development up to the year 2030. Again, the Rockefeller plan to use bioweapons to impose martial law, one quarantine at a time, is discussed on page 18. And scenario pre-planning, a world of tighter top-down government with authoritarian leadership worldwide. So, again, keeping in mind that this was put together as scenario planning and pre-planning in 2010, this is what they tell us will start occurring. In 2012, the pandemic that the world had been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike the 2009 H1N1, the new influenza strain, they say originating from wild geese, was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 2% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months, the majority of them healthy young adults. I would like to retract the healthy young adults. We're talking about COVID right now, and that is a cover-up for intense saturation of frequencies and the fact that many people have immune-compromised systems and they will not survive this increased, amped-up frequency that we have military weapon systems disguised as civilian communication networks. This is what has occurred. So I go back into their scenario planning. They tell us that the pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt. Sound familiar? This is exactly what is happening right now. Our mobility is screeched to a halt. This is UN Agenda 21 ramped up. And I must add at this point that your country, your town, your state, your city, wherever you are, most importantly, have predominantly already implemented the climate emergency resolutions to expedite all the requirements to reduce our standard of living by eliminating what they call fossil fuels. And I will only say that our fuels never came from dead dinosaurs. We talk about that often in other videos. Eliminating fossil fuels in its entirety, moving us into dense population zones to prevent traveling. This is all happening now, and we will be relocated off rural lands, as we are experiencing here. After fire events, our insurance is no longer being renewed. So if you're in the country or wherever you might be, and your insurance, which is all part of a Rockefeller-Rothschild cabal, will not be renewed. So I'm going to talk to some of these things from a personal note and observation of what we see happening while I continue to move through this document. And again, they talk about that everything will screech to a halt, which we see debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Important to note and remember, breaking global supply chains. Important to remember. Those of you that are looking to survive in tight-knit groups and form networks to survive as long as possible, supply chains are being broken. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings are now sitting empty, devoid of both employees and customers. Are you seeing all of that now? Yes, you are. All of it. They go on to say that the pandemic blanketed the planet through disproportionate numbers, and many died. And the virus spread like wildfire in the absence of official containment protocols. They go on to tell us in 2010 that even the developed countries' containment was a challenge. The United States, they say initial policy or strongly discouraging the citizens from flying proved deadly in latency, accelerating the spread of the virus, not just within the U.S. borders, but across borders. And few countries fared far better. They talked about China and how the Chinese government was quick to impose enforcement of mandatory quarantines for all citizens, as well as its instant sealing off of all borders, and how that saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than any other country and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. I will tell you, the post-pandemic recovery is not going to look anything as our lives looked like a month ago. will not look like anything. What you remember a month ago when they started to close down our area on St. Patrick's Day, February 17th of 2020, our lives will not return. Remember, I was telling you in part 1 that the plan is telecommuting of everything. Teleshopping, tele-entertainment, teletravel, teleeducation, telemedicine, telecommerce, telepolitics, and telesocialization. Everything from afar. They go on to tell us in this, during the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and regulations, from mandatory wearing of face masks. Are you listening to this? Back in 2010, they are scenario planning and wrote the script. So again, during the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from one mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at entries to communal spaces like markets, train stations, and everywhere else you wanted to go. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even more intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasing global problems and from pandemics and international terrorism, to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on all power, on all of you. We are going to see this massively. As I said in part 1, right now, they're issuing fines on people that sit and look at the sunset in San Diego and Southern California right now. $1,000 fines. You can't look at the sunset. At first, they tell us that the notion of more controlled world gained wide acceptance and approval, and citizens were willing to give up more of their sovereignty and their privacy. All of you are giving up more of your privacy by hiding in your homes from a business model of COVID that does not pass from person to person, as we are being told. We're hearing about hospitals in many instances are empty. They're bleeding out hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. They're empty. The hospitals that we are seeing are likely, and you can look into it for yourself, crisis actors. Because we have crisis actors of head of government. They're crisis actors. They're following scenario planning from those top 1% of the 1%. Make no mistake. They go on to tell us that in exchange for greater safety and stability, we will hover and accept less rights. Citizens were more tolerant and even eager for top-down direction and oversight, and national leaders had more latitude to impose order in ways they saw fit. In developed countries, this heightened oversight took many forms. And I want you to listen to this. Biometric IDs for all citizens. Are you hearing that now? Yes, you are. For example, in tighter regulation of key industries whose stability was deemed vital to national interests. More totalitarian authority and leadership worked less well in some cases, tragically, they're telling us, in countries run by irresponsible elites who use their increased power to pursue their own interest at the expense of their citizens. Wouldn't you say that is the United States Incorporated? Absolutely. Wouldn't you say those were the global governments around the world and how they're enacting authoritative and authoritarian regulations and rules and restrictions? Absolutely. They go on to say, across the developing world, the story was different and much more variable. Top-down authority took different forms in different countries, hinging largely on the capacity, caliber, and intentions of their leaders. There were other downsides, as the rise of virulent nationalism created new hazards.